Welcome to the IP Communications and VoIP community. We're at vuc.me on the web. We would like to thank for their support simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco with their world-class API. Check that out, simwood.com. Our host at PBX is from onsip.com. The website is hosted at bluehost.com. And where would we be without zipdx.com, the full-featured HG voice conference bridge? Local rate dial-ins from voxbone.com. Our next meetup in Europe is in Madrid, June 6th and 7th at TADHack. Go to tadhack.com to get the scoop on that. And that's right. Hello, everybody. This is the VUC. We meet every Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time. We have a great lineup today, and first of all, thanks to O'Reilly, we have a couple of copies of this book to give away. The book we're talking about is Real-Time Communication with WebRTC, and we have the two authors of that book with us today in his triumphant return, Simon Pietro Romano. And he's in a, we should have gotten the applause.
Hello,
but
guys.
There he is. He's in an airport, so he's going to be muted as much as he can.
Most of the time, actually, yeah.
Okay, but we're gonna hand it over to you in just a second. And also, for the first time, Salvatore Loreto, who is welcome.
Hi, hello, everybody. Hello,
Great
guys.
to see you. And if you don't mind, I hope this doesn't embarrass you, Salvatore, but I would like people to go to Sloreto, SLORETO.com and see who you are. Yeah, you leave us embarrassed, but he's got quite an interesting background to him. We heard from Simon Pietro a couple of weeks ago, so we know who he is. We've also got a bunch of, well, we have Lorenzo from a couple of weeks ago, too, Lorenzo Minero.
Hi, everybody.
There you go. And of course, we've got some of the regulars, and we also have Peter Dunkley, who's a WebRTC guy, and maybe a little later, possibly Tim Panton will join us, and even Emil, although we've got a full hangout. And the reason for that is that we are giving away 2 copies of the book, and we'll be doing that on IRC. So if you're watching or listening, get on the IRC channel, and that is the VUC channel on freenode.net. And I know our authors are going to jump over there to try to win their own book, but before they do that, get on IRC. You can also do it, if you don't know anything about IRC, go to vuc.me/IRC on the web. That will log you in. If you win, we'll get in touch with you by email, and you will be able to download the book. It's not DRM, so O'Reilly does it right, I have to say. And speaking of O'Reilly doing it right, these gentlemen wrote the book on WebRTC. It's a hot topic. Let me turn it over to Simon and let him give his intro, and he's got a very interesting presentation that he worked very hard on as well, and he's going to intro it. So, Simon, welcome back, and you take it away, please.
Okay. Thank you, Randy, and welcome to everybody. First of all, let me thank you for this new opportunity that you're providing me with, and I'll try to give you an introduction to our book on WebRTC. And let me also apologize, as Randy told you, actually I am in an airport right now. I was not supposed to be in an airport during this VUC, but actually I had a flight that was cancelled, and I've been scheduled on a flight that is going to depart from Palermo here in Sicily, South Italy, in a while. So I hope I will be able to stay until the end of the talk. In case I'm not able to do that, I will leave the floor to Salvatore and the others who are able to answer all of your questions. That's why I'm the one who is starting the talk, so I can have my floor right now. So I will start by sharing my desktop in order to show you a very brief presentation about the overall structure of our book. So let's get started with this. Okay. I hope you all can see this. Okay.
Looks good. It looks good.
Basically, okay, perfect. You see here there is the URL of the VUC that is live now. And this is what we are going to talk about. Actually, the title of the book is quite clear. It's real-time communication with the WebRTC set of APIs, with the WebRTC framework, I would say. The authors of this book are Salvatore Loreto and myself. You can find here our Twitter contacts, because nowadays this is latest fashion, and we are always available on this social network on Twitter. So what are we going to talk about is something that is obviously in line with the O'Reilly style. By the way, Randy, do you pronounce O'Reilly or O'Reilly, as I did until yesterday?
So I think it's O'Reilly.
Alrighty. Okay.
Okay, that's great. So I learned one more thing about my editor. Thank you. Basically, the idea when we made the proposal for this book, Salvatore and me, we had this idea of writing something very practical. So a learn by example approach, whereby you might really put your hands on the real thing and start doing some nice coding in order to play with the WebRTC set of APIs. And actually, the book contains, I would say, introductory material, which means that it is not on the advanced topics, which are, by the way, my main interest right now, but this is, I think, a nice introduction to the basics of WebRTC, and it should put the reader in such a condition as to become capable of doing his own, writing his own applications with the WebRTC APIs, and also have an idea of the ongoing efforts and keep an eye on the future development of this interesting technology. All of the code that is associated with the book can be found here on GitHub. This has become, let's say, the official repository for the code, so I really encourage you to take a look at it and download the sources, play with them, make changes, and provide us with feedback, because this is really something that has to be considered as a live repository. Okay, basically, what is the structure of this book? It is composed of 6 chapters. The core of the book is in chapters that go from 2 to 5. Chapter 1 is instead an introduction. It is, we try to keep it simple, but anyway, to insert all of the needed information inside the introductory chapter. The last chapter, chapter 6, is a sort of container of pointers to the advanced topics and also to topics that are still under discussion. So coming to the core, we structured the book as a sort of stepwise approach to the development of a WebRTC application. So in chapter 2, you find all the information related to how you can get access to your local devices and use the media that they provide. In chapter 3, we implement the so-called RTC web trapezoid, but by sticking to a local perspective. That is to say, by avoiding to tackle all of the issues that are associated with the need for managing a distributed deployment of a WebRTC application. So all the things associated with ICE candidate exchanging and gathering, to the exchanging of SDP offers, and so on and so forth. Basically, chapter 3 contains basic and complete information about the peer connection API. In chapter 4, we make a sort of, let's say, quick diversion to a different topic, which is, by the way, needed in order to move to the distributed setting. In fact, in chapter 4, we do not talk WebRTC. We just explain to the reader how he can manage and build a very simple signaling server. As you might know, WebRTC envisages the presence of a signaling server that is needed just during the setup phase. So it allows the two peers that then have to interact in a peer-to-peer fashion, it allows them to properly exchange session description protocol messages. And this is chapter 4. Sorry, that's
You
a
need
child
to
is crying.
stop torturing that child, would you please?
I'm gonna give him a biberon now. The core of the book is inside chapter 5, where we just complete the journey and we build a very simple yet complete WebRTC application, envisaging the presence of audio, video, and also the use of the data channel API. And so basically, that's it as to the book structure. The idea is that you can follow a sort of recipe. We call this the 10-step WebRTC recipe, whereby you start by accessing your local devices, getting the streams from your local devices, using them in order to have a preview inside your browser, and then starting the setup phase, which envisages the let's say the creation of a proper channel towards the other party. And when you contact the other party, you make the offer-answer exchange. Then you get back information about the remote stream, and you can use, eventually, you can use the remote stream and play it out in your own browser. And in this way, you complete the entire session creation and setup procedure. The book basically explains all of these, and it does this in a I would say rich fashion. We use code snippets, we comment all of the code snippets, we tried hard to properly describe all of the sequence diagrams, the interactions, in order to really, as I always say, walk hand in hand with our readers and let them become acquainted with this quite complicated technology, which is a technology that requires that you have some knowledge both of the networking issues that are associated with the creation of a session and with the programming issues that you have to properly manage, because here you are going to be a real web programmer. So basically, that's it. What you will be provided with during this VUC conference, apart from our nasty faces, is a description of the book, and if you want, we can clearly answer your questions and show you some code samples and as much things as you might want to be clarified. We are here just for this. That's it, I would say. I can stop sharing for a moment, and if you have questions, we can start with them, and I think Salvatore can add something to this introduction, and afterwards, if you want, we can perhaps have a look at some of the samples and the code stuff.
Yeah, I have a question for you, but
yeah.
I also want to mention that the people on IRC, get ready, because we have a couple of people who are ready to win this book. I'm going to post something on IRC on the channel, and then the people need to respond, and they'll win the book. Now, so you're WebRTC addicted. Let's hear about how did you get addicted to WebRTC? Here you are, a distinguished professor in Italy.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, okay. I think we already discussed this in some detail when we had VUC 485 associated with the Miteco collaboration platform. Actually, I am in the field of real-time communication since a while, and I attend ITF meetings. I started with the RTC Web Working Group, and I was very curious about that activity. And we also try to provide some support and some contribution, some active contribution to that. And as you know, inside our platform, which is a collaboration platform which is entirely web-based, this really was perfect as a technology that we could leverage in order to provide a better user experience to our users. So I started studying it, and since I am a distinguished professor, as you mentioned, I also started giving classes about this, because I also teach telematics applications, so this is part of my classes. And so I thought I can write a book and use the book also to properly explain all of this stuff to my students and perhaps to people interested all around the world. That's it.
I'm trying to follow on IRC who won the book here. The very
it's
first...
Simon Romano.
Yes, wait a minute. Is that... Wait, we have to check the spelling here. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so Ken won, and Peter's. Yes, look at that. All right, Ken won, and Peter Dunkley. Peter, do you really need this book? Come on. I guess he's good. All right. Anyway, he won it.
So the next guy can have it.
All right. So
for fun.
that was fun, Peter. I think you could write your own book on it. All right. So Jeff and Ken won, and let me try to.
Peter,
guys,
it's not for you, that one.
Would you please, well, Ken, I think I know how to reach you. Jeff VoIP DIY, if you could direct message me your email or whatever, that would be good. I'm pretty sure I've got Ken's. Okay, anybody have any questions before we try to continue here? And try is the operative word as far as I'm concerned.
So I'm curious to know, as an academic, how you felt the WebRTC API looks. I mean, you presumably you've looked at a load of APIs and worked on a lot. How does it, compare with other APIs in terms of, I don't know, how aesthetically pleasing it is, how complete it is, that kind of stuff?
This is not a fair question, actually. Not at all, because I know that you know that there is a querelle ongoing related to this, and this querelle sees many important participants, and we have two different camps. I do not want to be on one or on the other, but actually I think that both communities, I mean the supporters and those who are against the WebRTC approach, have some reason, and they have their own proposals that can, I would say, they have some pros and some cons, each of the proposal. As people might know, currently there is this trend towards the completion of the first effort associated with WebRTC API, which is deemed to be quite okay, not perfect, but I think that nothing is perfect, just to start with, and I think that it can be improved, clearly. Personally, I am in favor of completing the WebRTC 1.0 API and starting to work on the future, and I would like the future to be, let's say, backward compatible to the standardized 1.0 API. The alternative effort that people are looking at with curiosity is the orca.js. I think that you have heard about it, obviously, and I had a deep look at it because everything is on GitHub, the code is there, it's open sourced, it's documented, and it's nice. It's okay. So I think that we have to stop disputing about how good WebRTC is. It is something that can do the job, and we have to work on the products with WebRTC 1.0 API, and afterwards we can start doing some interesting stuff with some drill-down functionality made available to the programmers. But basically, my personal view is that this is a good API. It provides you with some powerful means to implement advanced web-based applications, and there are some things that it needs to, where you need to make some more work. As many people say, the session description part is, I think, the beast that we have to fight against, but this is something that goes beyond the WebRTC discussion, in my personal view. It's something that is a tough topic, a hot topic, and which involves many different areas, and inside the standardization bodies, many different working groups.
So, how easy? This is a safer question, I think. It was unfair to ask that first, but what? How easy do you find it to teach? Do you find that people pick it up reasonably quickly, or do you find that the fact that you've got to kind of deal with both sides simultaneously makes it harder to teach? Or because I find when I do a demo, as one person, it's actually really difficult to. I find myself physically moving from one side of the stage to the other to try and kind of look like I'm two people.
Yes.
How do you teach that?
Yeah, I love this question, by the way. It's hard to teach this. It's nice to teach this because personally, let's say my first class is the computer networks class. So I love using a networking-based approach. So just to give you the idea, when I do computer networks, I just use Wireshark as my main means of showing my students what is going on between two endpoints that are communicating between one another. On the other side, I think that if you have no advanced programming skills, you can never enter this world because you have to be aware of what JavaScript means, or what is a bidirectional HTTP communication. You have to be aware of event-based programming paradigms. So it's really hard. When I teach this, I do this as the very final part of my course, which is an advanced one. And before doing this, I teach my students everything related to web-based programming and everything based to VoIP applications. This means that, for example, the ICE protocol has to be known to them because otherwise you get lost. When you see all these handlers for ICE candidates, you have to know offer answer, you have to know some advanced information about the things that are going on inside the standardization bodies, because, for example, the trickle ICE approach has to be something that you are at least a bit familiar with. So again, it's an advanced topic for an advanced course, and it needs advanced explanation means. The tough part is if you are used to use Wireshark to show this networking stuff, you cannot do this for WebRTC. And for this part, I am using all of the developer tools inside the browsers, which really provide you with some very useful means. And in fact, for example, inside the book, we also put a small section on all of the facilities that, for example, the Chrome browser makes available to you if you want to properly debug what's going on between two peers that are interacting through WebRTC. You can carry out a sort of trace back by using two browsers with two open tabs and by going to the developer tools with the JavaScript console, and by also having a look at the WebRTC internals tab that perhaps we can also show today just to give the flavor. But again, it's difficult, it's hard to teach this, and it's very challenging, by the way. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the Wireshark approach. We did a Matt Fredrickson and I did a talk at Astracon last year about what you see on the UDP level and trying to teach people how to walk through that. In fact, and how to walk through the Wireshark. And Wireshark's not really tuned to that because it tends to assume that if you've got one port, then there's only one thing going over it. Whereas
exactly, that's what I was saying. Actually, yes.
But that's kind of interesting. There are ways to deal with that. So we've talked about that. But again, that's a real, as you say, that's an advanced level topic. That's quite a, you need an audience who knows at least something about RTP to be able to do that. Cool.
Yeah, you have to have a deep knowledge of networking protocols, application level networking protocols, and you also have to be a good programmer. Not the best programmer ever, but you have to have some familiarity with all this stuff, because otherwise you cannot manage it.
So let's get. It looks like. Did I hear somebody on ZipX wanting to?
No, you heard me. I thought.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Can we go from the advanced level back down to something a little bit more basic? It has been said, in fact, said on the VUC that WebRTC in its pure state is reasonably useless on its own. You actually have to combine WebRTC with other components in order to make it really good. So if you had to pick the, I don't know, the top 3 or 4 things that you would want to add WebRTC to make it useful, what would they be?
You mean in terms of different technologies that you need to use in order to properly complement the WebRTC API and approach?
Indeed. I mean, what I was trying to say was WebRTC in its pure form doesn't actually doesn't do very much, but in order to get a compelling application, you've got to combine it with other things.
Yeah, sure. Basically, I think that first of all, WebRTC, as you know, is peer-to-peer, but it actually is not 100% peer-to-peer, because before you can start go peer-to-peer, you have to set up the channel. So you need, for granted, some server-side means of carrying out the negotiation. And for this, what I usually recommend the use of the Node.js platform, which is server-side JavaScript, but just because it's really flexible and lightweight, and since you do not need to do that much processing on server-side, but basically you have to relay things back and forth, this is a very nice approach. And it's a different use of the JavaScript language, by the way. If you are not going to use this approach, there are plenty of others. You can use something based on Java servlets, on the classical application server approach if you want to do that. You can use instant messaging, but I mean, the server-side component needed during the negotiation is a fundamental one. And from the application standpoint, if you want to have an enriched application, again, you need some server-side component that is seen by your browser as a peer, but which actually is not a real endpoint. And this is, for example, the case of the MCU for conferencing. And this is a headache, actually. We're working on that. We also discussed this during VUC 485. And in that case, you need to be a real good engineer, because you have to let the browsers believe that they are negotiating something with another browser, but actually you are a server-side component that is properly playing with things and making things go on in a smooth way by properly processing them, and this becomes really, really hard. And for example, this is something that we are not touching upon inside the book, because we deem it too advanced for an introductory book, actually. I would really love to write something about this in a further book, which should be something that gives for granted that you are already acquainted with the basics, you know. And this is a huge new part for WebRTC.
Yeah, you did a good job there, Simon, just getting in the plug for the next book. In fact, the next 2 or 3 books, I think, probably.
Yeah, at least, because the third one will be on Orca.
Brilliant.
I think I heard somewhere that Peter had a question.
Actually, before you go on, I want to say my view on James' question.
Perfect.
Okay. So I think that WebRTC is not meant to be, let's say, it's never meant to be a framework, a complete framework that can be standalone. It has always thought to be just another piece of what will be the future of the web framework as such. And wherever we will go, we will never see something that will be possible to do just with the WebRTC API. You will always need something else. You will need something else like some other API, some other JavaScript API, some other maybe support from, as Simon was telling you, some support from network side or such. That's somehow it's also the web philosophy. And we have already done a really major step in the web architecture, going from a poor client-server architecture in a peer-to-peer architecture. And this is something it's already a really big step that all the community has to get used with, and I guess that we have also to start to understand or investigating what it means from security point of view. We need actually even more components from the network side and from the web server in order to complete the architecture.
Brilliant. I have a feeling that Peter Dunkley is getting warmed up to make a comment somehow, because with that lead-in, he won't be able to resist. Having said that, he's gone and he's muted himself, which is annoying.
I can also tell you that things will become more and more complicated, because it's already complicated. And one of the challenges is how you make simple for the JavaScript developers things that are really complicated at
in fact, the art is to make something, and WebRTC is complicated, but the art of the craftsman is to make it appear to be really simple. And the best WebRTC apps that I've seen are those that you don't really even realize that it's WebRTC until you dive in. It's totally seamless.
I think
Totally
I might disagree, actually. I think.
Tim, what a surprise!
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. No, but seriously, I think that if you look at things like at some of the other developments that are happening in the web world, there's actually some movement towards making web programming less complicated. So if you look at some things like kind of, to an extent, things like jQuery and Angular.js and Polymer and just to the generic web components, there's an attempt to make the web more package based. So you pick up a component that does this, you pick up a component that does that, you put it together into a Bootstrap, and you've got a website that pretty much works. And I went to a talk last night where some people were showing Hoodie, and that's a it's actually underneath.
Sorry, Tim. Showing what?
A framework called Hoodie, HOOD.IE, and it's a WebJS, Node.js platform, but it basically lets you get on with programming and does all the stuff like accounts and login and sending reminder emails and all that stuff for you, and you get to concentrate on the job in hand. And I can imagine that somebody will do a good WebRTC plugin for that, and it'll just be another component that people can, like dealing with logins and emails and whatever, it'll just be another thing they'll switch on if they want it. And so a lot of web developers aren't going to even touch on that complexity, I think, once those toolkits start pulling it in. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I think that these things will get pulled into the into those web developers' toolkits, rather than the web developers saying, oh, look, I'm going to pick a fight with Peter here, I want SIP.js, There are people who do need that because they want to interact with the SIP infrastructure, but if you're just a web developer and you want to kind of have, a two-way conversation on your bug tracker site, you probably don't need SIP. And those sorts of people are going to use something like jQuery or whatever to do that interaction. So I think it's interesting.
I
agree. I guess that.
I agree with Tim. Sorry, I was going to say I actually agree. If you don't need SIP, you don't have to use it. But there's a very interesting post on the WebRTC Hacks website last week, where the author, who said he was initially one of the people who said you shouldn't use SIP, has come to the conclusion that actually, to be totally honest, it doesn't matter, because what's important is the API. If you've got a library that does signaling and you've got a network infrastructure that you're using that does signaling, what's important to the JavaScript developer is the API into the library, not necessarily what's on the wire. There are some use cases where SIP is going to be from the browser is actually quite useful. There are some use cases where it's unnecessary. I'm not sure there are any use cases where it doesn't work. So ultimately, my advice to people would be to use SIP where it's going to help you, and in other cases, don't worry about what's going over the wire. pick the library that offers you the features you need and that has the API that's most suited to your need. And don't worry about whether it's XMPP or SIP underneath.
So one of the interesting other things that was on, now which blog was it? The blog.geek.me site was about how the trouble is that those API vendors are getting bought up. So if you use now which one was it? AdLive. So they got bought, and now they're not taking any new customers. So if you'd committed to using that API and their infrastructure, are you stuck now?
You are, I suppose you would be, but then on the other hand, this is generally what happens. This is, there's no guarantee that Tropo's API will continue on forever, or Twilio's API will continue on forever, or
the only guarantee you have is if those are open source. If it's an open source API, which Phono's client side is, then at least you can use that whether the rest of the infrastructure is there or not.
Yes, but for the average person,
the value, of course.
The average person who's using the Tropo API is going to be pretty stuffed if the Phono Tropo infrastructure goes away, because they probably don't actually know how to build that.
Yeah, and totally agree. The reason I brought it up is that that's another factor you need to use to decide on your API, is how long-lived do you think it might be.
But that's not an API question, that's a company question. If you're buying from a more established vendor, then there are never any guarantees. But if it's a more established vendor, there is probably a better chance of it being supported for a longer period of time. But that's what always happens on the internet.
But let me clarify then. When I was talking about the things are getting complicated, I was not referring to the API level. I was referring to the lower level, to the protocol level. There will be and there are already things that people are working on. Things will change in their protocol. Transport protocol will change there at that level. We will see a lot of new things, and people will have to adapt. And I'm here thinking on not the JavaScript developer.
That's why using an API platform and a library helps you, because if you're using one of those from a reputable company, they will do the adapting for you. So the question is, will the developers of the vast majority of WebRTC websites do it themselves, or will they leverage somebody else's technology, whether it's an open source project or buying it from another company? And if they take advantage of somebody else's technology and they make the right choice about it, they, in theory, shouldn't have to adapt, or shouldn't have to adapt much. And I think that's probably where a lot of it's going to come from. Because an awful lot of those, they talk about the 1 million or 100 million JavaScript programmers out of there, the copy and paste programmers. Many of them aren't even capable of understanding what's going on at the real-time communications level, because there's some guy who boss one day said, "Today you're a programmer, go put a widget on my website." And those are actually going to be the vast majority of people who are using this.
I agree.
Yeah, that's the good thing about having a middle-level API as we have it now, because at the beginning of WebRTC, RTC Web, most of the discussions were also related to at what level the API should be, whether it should be a low-level API where you had a lot of control of what was going to happen at the transport level and RTP and so on, or whether you would just need a higher-level API to just do basic things. Eventually, we went to a middle ground, and we chose some kind of a middle-level API like JSAPIs, which still allows for more complicated things if you have to put your hands into it for any reason, or you can just rely on someone else, like you were mentioning, on someone else preparing an API that makes things much easier for you to do, just putting an API on top of that middle-level API. And that's just one of the nice things about WebRTC. And just like Salvatore said, things are going to change probably, but if the API keeps stable enough, or whether it changes or not, we can still rely on the fact that there is going to be high-level APIs that are going to mask this for us.
Can I add one more bit to this? I totally agree with things that you're saying, and if we talk about technologies, there is one technology that has not been mentioned and which I really like lately, which is Coffeescript. It's a higher level language when compared to JavaScript. It directly compiles into JavaScript, and what, for example, I would like to have is the possibility of using a Coffeescript library that directly maps onto a JavaScript, standard JavaScript set of API calls based on WebRTC, something like this. Because basically with a language like Coffeescript, for example, if you're used to the object-oriented paradigm, you can just leverage it in a seamless fashion. So that's something that, for example, I'm personally exploring. I don't know if you had some experience with it.
Well, I know that the Cobus SIP stack that they've written is actually written in CoffeeScript, and presumably therefore is drivable from that. And
it's great, I think. Did you have some experience, Peter, by the way, with it?
We haven't used it because it's not quite as feature rich as GSSIP, and also we started using GSSIP before it was available. So even today, GSSIP has a few more signaling features that we take advantage of. Plus, we've also had to branch GSSIP ourselves to add some extra stuff into it.
Yeah, I see. But what I was saying, did you have some programming experience with CoffeeScript, not related necessarily to SIP or WebRTC? I mean, if you do also a simple application with CoffeeScript, you really feel like you can use all of your backward compatible object-oriented knowledge and bring it to the web. This was my personal feeling, my personal experience, and I was really excited with it. I know that it's premature probably, but I think that is something that is worth exploring for sure.
Okay, it's fantastic. I was just mentioning to people in IRC that we're really privileged to be able to be a part of a dialogue between such. The word distinguished doesn't really do it because it sounds like people in suits and ties. And
stop it.
That doesn't give the actual value of this. This is bleeding edge, state of the art stuff. I'm really pleased that we got you guys together, and that's why I made the point to invite other people on this thing. I had a question, but I kind of forgot it. So let's make sure that we have everybody who has questions in, for example, ZipDX. We're talking about ZipDX. They're on audio and they're listening. If anybody has a question, please unmute yourself and ask it. Leave a little silence here for that. Carl Fife apparently was not able to make the transition from John Todd 0.3 quality audio.
No Carl.
No Carl. Well, he'll be back, I'm sure. I also wanted to make sure that we realize that Simon, or Simon, as we call him in the Anglo world, is in an airport, and he may be called at any second to leave us. So,
exactly. Yeah. But
how are things
I'm sitting
here?
close to my gate, so don't worry. I can listen to the call.
Okay.
No, it's going to be in some minutes.
It's fantastic.
Sorry about that, David. I'm awfully sorry about that.
No, that's great. David Burgess just joined, by the way, Tim. So maybe he'll have some questions or be listening. Michael's asking to what extent all these vendor APIs represent a trap for developers, and that's kind of in line with what was being said on IRC regarding people pulling the rug out. You're working with, say, Voxeo or Tropo or Twilio or whatever, and all of a sudden they, for some reason, lose ground. They get sold. Whatever happens. That's not going to be working anymore. That's always going to be a problem. So Michael says, Michael, you want to jump in and state your case? So he's saying, should we be wary of startups? And this is a big problem. I mean, especially when you're on the bleeding edge. Looks like Peter has something he wants to say.
I was going to say that this always happens, but if you consider you're a small startup and you need to develop, and I'm going to give an example that I would hope no more startups are really going to do. You're going to develop the next great video conferencing website, and there are so many of them now, you would be kind of crazy to try. But let's say you're going to. Probably time to market is going to be the most important thing for you. So yes, you need to be careful about what platform you pick, but there's a pretty good chance that depending on who your developers are, you might not have time to learn all this yourself, so you may well have no choice but to use an API. And at that point, you've kind of got to take the best guess that you can as to who's likely to be around, and live with the fact that your choice is actually between being completely safe but 6 months later. It's not an easy call, but it's not a new problem. It's kind of the same in every new technology area.
I think that there's one shading I'd put on that, which is that if you pick an open source project and that's adequately documented and you're successful, then you can pay for somebody to maintain it. So if you're not successful, then frankly you don't care anyway. If you're a small startup and you pick an open source project, then even if the people doing the open source get bored and wander off or get bored, then at least it's open source and you can pay for somebody else to maintain it. And that may end up being more expensive than developing it yourself, but on the other hand, by that point, hopefully you've got the money, you've done your Series A, and you can afford it. And that's a very kind of Silicon Valley way of looking at it, but I think it's an option that people might want to think about is if it's an open source project, and even better if it's based on documented standards. So either there's a level of documentation that's good, or there's enough standardization that you can see what's going on, then you've got a reasonable chance of being able to recruit some third party to maintain it. Whereas if it's purely proprietary, then that is really difficult, because basically you're locked into whatever they choose to offer you. And if it's a big company, you may be happy with that. But if it's a startup and it gets bought by Facebook, then you're stuffed.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at it as well, of course, is you're far more likely to be able to get fast support from an established company. Some open source projects are great. Some open source projects are, hey, it's open source, you've got the code, support yourself. And so, I mean, my advice would be to work out what you need and evaluate everything. And that means looking at open source and non-open source. And
Peter, can I add something to this? This is Simon again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, perhaps I'm a bit in an awkward situation here because I have some conflict of interest, but I'm really interested in these issues related to startups which make open source software, and if you have whether or not you have to trust them. I would like to open here a can of worms right now related to licensing, okay? And I would like afterwards to ask Lorenzo to add something on this, because we are currently experiencing a number of stuff, and we did not even know this. We were not aware, for example, of the fact that if you release something in an AGPL form, and it's for you open source, and you chose AGPL just because you wanted that the modifications made by the community could be brought back to your main code, we discovered that, for example, companies do not trust the fact that they can use this code, and they contact you and they ask you if you can release your code under a different license. And I also understand now why, and I think that there are a number of complicated issues that have to be properly dealt with before, on one side, before you make the delivery of your code as an open source repository, and on the other side, before you start using someone else's open source code, if it is in an AGPL format, for example. I don't know if you get the point, and perhaps you are more expert than me on this, but I found myself in the situation of having to study all this stuff, and I thought it was much easier than it actually is.
I've gone through this myself. At the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to look at the license. And there will be some bits of software where you're saying GPL is okay, but AGPL isn't. And there'll be other bits of software where you're saying Apache-like or BSD-like or MIT-like or any one of those is fine, but GPL isn't even.
Yeah, you need a pool of lawyers, actually.
Well, you don't necessarily need a pool of lawyers. What you need to do is make sure that all of the engineers who are working on things and may well pull in some random package or other knows that or what the type of distribution, type of sale model. If you're a company producing something, each part of your system will be, so that you can make sure they pick the right kind of stuff under the right license. And you know what? If at the end of the day there's a bit of open source software and it has a license that doesn't work for you, you can't use it. That's open source.
Yes,
you know.
I agree.
Yeah, just to add to what Simon said. Yeah, just to what Simon said. Yeah, the issue is basically that you have two different points of view, because from on one side you have the engineers working on a solution that are looking at open source solutions and try to evaluate the licenses, what works for them and what doesn't. And on the other hand, you have open source developers who have to work out which license works the best to make their product as widespread as possible without losing a bit of control on the software, or without risking the fact of being the only one developing the software, because a too open licensing might mean that everybody's just exploiting your work but not giving anything back and so on. Which is why we recently chose AGPL for that, and found out that a lot of people do not like it at all for some reason. And so we were trying to understand how we could go around that. There are some people that, for instance, the MongoDB people, they have an AGPL implementation for the database, but they have their drivers that are licensed in a different way, because apparently this makes things easier for third-party developers to use it without having to care about the AGPL stuff. So yeah, I guess it's an issue.
Well, I don't think that the issue is the license of the open source as such. I think that you need, as a startup or as a company, you need to have or think your business model, your competitive advantage, and even if you are based on open source code, you cannot put all your eggs just on the open source and say, okay, all my value is on the open source. So there are two things that are different. You do open source because you want others develop your code and take advantage of that. But then your product will be, of course, something that will use that, but will not be based 100% on that.
Yeah, I mean, you've just got to be careful. You just got to be very careful about what components you use and what licenses they have. You have to look at each one and say, if you're in a business, if you're in a company, you have to look at each one and say, are the goals of this project, this bit of software, this bit of business compatible with the license of the components I want to use? And if they're not, they're not. But it's just one of those things people need to be aware of. But the Crocodile, before we were sort of taken over by the people that we had this deal with, the people that took us over. You know, we'd been using open source stuff for 3 years, and we'd been contributing to it. Not everything that we developed was open sourced. A lot of what we developed was, but not everything was. And it was all about picking and choosing what parts make sense for your business.
Yes. I can tell you that also from my experience working for a big company, we also use a lot of open source, but we do a careful choice of what we can use. Yeah. And if we don't find anything that we can use, then we have to do by ourselves.
Or buy it.
Or buy it, yes. We have enough money. Right?
I mean, I can also speak from the point of view of having run an open source project where we made the license to open. I mean, it was an intermediate SNMP library which we wrote a very long time ago, and I mean, it's probably not being used very much now, but in its day, we found that a lot of companies were using it and paying us absolutely nothing. I mean, quite often we'd only find out because, you know, they'd been bought. So that you'd get a phone call from the lawyers at HP, and they bought some storage company that was using our SNMP library as part of their management API, and HP would say, we need you to give us FIPS verification for the encryption in this library. We're saying, well, look, it's open source. You know, you've paid us nothing for it for 4 years, and now you want us to give you a FIPS certificate and an export guarantee certificate. It's just like, No, basically, if you want to pay us £30,000 to do the paperwork on that, we'd be happy to. But until you do, go away. And that happened more than once. We found people like Cisco and Orange and all sorts of people were using it and depending on it, but actually not paying for support, not paying any other kind of activity, back to us. I mean, it didn't really matter because we got paid to develop it and it was fun and we didn't care. But it is a risk. If that's something you want to pay the mortgage with, then a really open license, a BSD license really open license, isn't going to pay the bills.
I think that's why a lot of the people doing these WebRTC API libraries, it's pretty common to open source the client side, but you keep the network to yourself because, yes, the library is open source and people can take parts of it perhaps and connect it to other networks, but if they are someone who doesn't have expertise in that area, they pretty much do have to connect it to your back end. And access to that back end is about the only way you can make money off of that in that particular environment. So, yes, you can open source the client side, and yes, some people may well take bits of it and it'll be helpful for them. But to be honest, the people who are doing that aren't really going to be the users of the client anyway, because the people who are using the client don't necessarily have that deep knowledge. And what you're selling is the service of the network, to be honest.
And I think this is a crucial point, actually. But my personal concern is, in fact, on the server side, on the back end, I think that most of the issues arise when you look at the back end, actually. And
yes,
I think you really touched the point.
But although there are a few open source implementations for backends and other bits and pieces, so somebody's giving you the open source code for the backend, you still now have to build a resilient system, which is monitored, presumably 24/7, with engineers on call and everything else. Even if you're saying, okay, well, the whole thing's open source end to end, that doesn't mean it's free for you to set up. It is probably cheaper for you to use somebody else's backend, because otherwise, depending on how critical your system is, you're going to have support engineers running around the clock. Now, if you're already a big telco, like somebody like Truephone will already have a network operations center, but some small startup isn't going to have that. So this is, and this is really, it's you kind of, there are lots of options out there, but sometimes the completely open source ones aren't actually suitable.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd emphasize that. I agree. I mean, the other thing that a bigger player will have is maybe turn servers spread around the world in high bandwidth centers, and that's something that's very expensive to do as a startup. Now, hopefully, your WebRTC, the profile of your WebRTC users is such that, I don't know, whatever it is, 85% of them go to peer-to-peer, but
so basically, servicing enterprises, which are the only ones you're going to pay for a service anyway.
Exactly what I was going to say. The chances are half of, one end of any given call is an enterprise, and they need to be being given a turn server because they're behind some restricted firewall. So, I think Peter's absolutely right that your infrastructure and the way that infrastructure is maintained is something that somebody has to pay for and somebody has to look after. And as a startup, maybe you can do that, but it's a significant cost.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. There's going to be almost two kinds of WebRTC out there, and I'm going to call one of them trivial, even though it's going to be a lot of value. And you're talking like online dating, matching two people up and letting them talk to each other. Those are going to be folk at home. 90, 95, almost 100% of that, you're not going to need a turn server because they're on residential networks and it's not a problem. But if you're actually trying to sell WebRTC and you're selling it to enterprises to improve their communications, as Tim said, pretty much every single session is going to involve a turn server in that particular scenario. It's probably not going to be the majority of WebRTC calls per volume, but in terms of revenue, it's probably going to be a disproportionately high percentage of the WebRTC that actually has money attached to it.
Whenever I hear a silence of this magnitude, I always feel like I need to jump in and turn my camera on. Hey.
Well, I was
Hey,
right, because Peter was warming up for one of those Peter moments.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have anybody on ZipDX who would like to jump in, or anywhere else, really, looking at
Hey guys,
IRC?
sorry,
Go.
I think that my moment has come. I think I'll have to collect my belongings and go to the gate.
Okay, Simon,
I'm happy
thank you
that
for
I was
joining
able
us.
to stay 1 hour with you, and I'm really sorry. And I promise that I will be back on other VUCs as a listener next time. Okay, and it will be a
Excellent.
pleasure as usual.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Simon.
you,
We'll see
guys.
you
Thank
on the
you,
other
guys.
side, as they say.
I leave you with
Take care.
Salvatore, so you can ask him everything you want.
Okay, great.
Thanks a lot, Randy. Really, thank you. Goodbye.
Take care,
Bye.
Simon. See you later. Okay,
Bye.
that's terrific. And we did give away our 2 copies of books. God, one of our regular users, Ken, won one, and Jeff won one. So that's great. This is fantastic that O'Reilly worked with us too. You can't help but admire them. Those guys, if you want to write a book, write it for O'Reilly because they have no DRM. They work with the VUC. They give us copies to give away. They are the greatest. Now, anybody have any questions for Salvatore, or even Lorenzo's with us, and anybody else, Peter and Tim also? We have a really fantastic crew here. So we're looking for ZipDX before James or anybody else comes in. ZipDX, where's Carl? Where's Carl Fife? Carl Fife, are you with us? I don't think he is. I think he had to drop
If
off.
nobody has a question, I can touch
Sure.
another point that has not been yet.
Go right ahead.
And
Go right ahead, Salvatore.
yeah, well, a lot of WebRTC. It's about audio and video, right? And how WebRTC will substitute or will become the real voice over IP client and server or infrastructure. But WebRTC, it's much more than that. And a part that, a big part of WebRTC is the data channel, right? That maybe has not been explored deeply yet, but it will. I've already seen several startups starting to build something on the data channel, and we will see more and more things going on the data channel. Maybe I can be biased on this because I've been working on the standard part on the data channel, but it's really the part where I think we will see more innovation and we will see something different or some great innovation in the communication world. I don't know if you have had any experience on the data channel, what you think, but I can tell you that I've been involved since the beginning with the WebSocket development. And maybe I can tell you the story also, maybe you missed that when we start WebRTC, before we went for WebRTC as it is, a bunch of companies, really 30 companies, were just start to explore how to do real-time communication over WebSocket. And we also did we get quite well and acceptable results. But then in Nixon from Google came out with this brilliant idea on what working group about establish a peer-to-peer connection. And then we moved to WebRTC. And we move on WebRTC for audio and video, but also for data channel. So WebSocket experience was then somehow the father of the WebRTC. And now a lot of things that experience that we get with the WebRTC, with the WebSocket are based on WebRTC, and data channel got a lot of improvements from that, and we will see really great innovation there.
Yeah, I'm not one of the greatest fans of the data channels, as I think we discussed a couple of sessions ago, but I do understand it as a really important role because there are scenarios where it can be really useful. Because I seem to recall, for instance, there were discussions on the RTC Web working group about having real-time text, for instance, involved within video calls or stuff like that. Something that is also needed for legal reasons in some countries and so on. And so rather than having real-time text implemented on top of RTP and so having it as an additional media within the WebRTC stack as itself, it made sense to make use, for instance, of the data channel to implement this kind of feature. And I guess that this is one of the scenarios where WebSockets approaches might not be feasible, for instance, for latency reasons and so on, and so data channels may be useful. But in general, I still fail to see a really useful use case for data channel itself themselves. So I just hope I'll be proven wrong in the future. But right now, I still think that it's easier to rely on existing approaches like WebSockets or other bidirectional HTTP means and so on.
There is an interesting. There's an interesting use of the data channel already. It's actually used as part of the Chromecast stuff. And I didn't realize this until I went to the BBC website. The BBC in the UK on their iPlayer application has added Chromecast support. And because they're a sort of publicly funded one, how they've done it isn't secret. They published some information about how it works. And the data channel is actually used alongside the media. Basically, with the Chromecast, it starts transmitting in medium quality and adjusts it up and down, and there are control signals going backwards and forwards across the data channel. Now, in that particular situation, where your overall connection has been initiated by a smartphone or a computer that's separate, but ultimately the WebRTC connection is now going between an embedded device and Netflix servers, actually having the data channel presumably multiplexed down that same peer connection is very useful.
I mean, the last thing the BBC wanted to do was to have all of that transiting through WebSockets on their web server.
Yeah, but actually,
because you could have like 6 million users.
Yeah. But actually, it's not even their choice anyway. That's how Chromecast works. But it actually makes a lot of sense for it to work that way.
Right.
Well, I think that the problem with data channel is that it will be a disruptive part of the communication, because nowadays we are only used to have communication based on audio and video. Also the chatting, we think that it's always client server, and we are not at least the one of us that have been working so much or for so many years in the telecom world. We are so used to the old way of doing things that we cannot, we don't have an open mind to see how things will be in the future. Yeah. But I can tell you that in the video distribution part, that's the data channel is it's an important part. I've already seen one startup doing an open CDN, where let's say you actually the idea is that CDN is not for free. They will send you a bill at the end of the month and let you pay a lot of dollars or euros or whatever. And if you use data channel, you can start to build a peer-to-peer infrastructure to offload the traffic that you use on the CDN. That's one part.
Yes, but the problem is that you're in very real danger at that point of seriously pissing off your customers, because the CDN still isn't free. You're just making your customers pay for it instead of you. Now, if your customers are already paying you for a service and they find out that their bandwidth is being sucked by that service as well, they're not going to be happy. So this was one of the examples that was posted on the Blog Geek website. Netflix should be using data channel as a content distribution network. You know what? I'm a Netflix subscriber. I pay money to Netflix. I pay money to my ISP. I would get really, really, really pissed off if Netflix or whoever else was then effectively stealing my bandwidth in order to provide their service. That's why I'm paying them. Now, you would need almost and this is the danger of that kind of peer-to-peer operation. People who download things like BitTorrent and use peer-to-peer at the moment explicitly know what they're doing. They explicitly know that that's what that service is doing. Whereas putting this in, having this pure CDN stuff in a website, and you don't even know that's what's happening. That's getting a little bit sticky from a consumer point of view, I think.
I agree. I'm not saying that it's easy. People have to come up with the really new and different business model. Maybe with a totally different pay model for people or for those kind of clients. But that's just one of the possibility. I'm not saying that it's only one. It's just to show that innovation is there. And I've also seen already JavaScript codec and people that are thinking to use data channels also to stream on data channel the audio and video to get rid of all the limitation that you have with your browser.
I think, Peter, you're right that that there are real problems with using the data channel indiscriminately. It has to be tied, as Salvatore was saying, to the business model. But you could imagine some kind of, Airbnb version of Netflix, or like Fon, for example, where you get a bonus because you've decided to allow that. You could have a tiered rate of subscription. You might pay $1 a month less if you allow your endpoint to act as a peer. That sort of business model where it's explicit, I think it's fine. You're absolutely right. If it's done by subterfuge or people don't make that kind of sharing economy trade-off clear, then yeah, sure, that's a huge problem.
Yeah. But it's also, the problem is, for example, in my case, I've got a mobile phone with a 1 gigabyte data limit on it. Now, I don't use that every month, so I might be traveling somewhere and decide to watch a 30-minute episode of some TV show or something on Netflix, and that's great. I'm almost in the position where if I knew it was going on, I might be okay with data channel from home. But I wouldn't be at all okay with data channel over my mobile phone because it's going to, I've got maybe enough to watch one episode. If I'm using the data channel, it's going to be a fraction of that. The problem is that my home computer is going to be on Netflix. My home computer is not going to go, I'm in mobile, I'm not connected through a mobile, I'll do it differently. It's...
Well, pedantically, you're probably not paying for upload, actually, so it may not matter. But that's
well,
just
if people start doing that, how quickly do you think you'll start paying for upload?
That's true. Well, it'll take them about 5 years, like it takes them 5 years to do anything.
I think on something like this, where they could charge for it, it'll take them a lot less, actually.
Things are changing, guys. When I was saying or telling the example of CDN, actually I was thinking about mobile phone, because on mobile phone, of course, you have a really problem and really your subscription is not unlimited. Your data plan is not unlimited, but even there, for example, in the US, I know that there are at least one big operator that is thinking to go for toll-free data, where if you visit some website, then you don't pay for the traffic that is generated from that website, because it's that website that has already paid that telecom operator. So it will be things have to be right at business model, not the technology is there. Technology is just a mean. It's not.
Well, don't get me started on the mobile companies, because 3 years ago I had unlimited data and now I don't. In the UK it's gone the other way. Okay, I used to have unlimited data, and then the mobile operators found out what that really meant, and it is no longer quite so easy to get unlimited data.
I have unlimited data.
On your company phone.
You are a phone company, James. It's all your fault.
Yeah, but that's also part of the Netflix business model. You know that until a couple of months ago, I don't know if they have changed or not, Netflix was not in business relationship with any telecom operator. They were just suggesting you which operator to choose in order to get a better experience of their movie.
I've had Netflix on my Virgin Media set-top box in the UK for about 6 months, and it was announced before that. They've had certainly in the UK, they've had a special deal with or a relationship with Virgin Media probably for over a year now. And I think there are some fixed operators in the US they do it with as well, because it's how they started distributing when in the US they started doing their Super HD trials. You can only get the Super HD stuff from Netflix if you're on certain ISPs, and it's the same in the UK. But they started doing this about a year ago.
Okay.
And there's actually, if you've got Virgin Media in the UK, there's a specific TV channel you can go to that's the Netflix channel, and it pops up a Netflix login screen.
Oh, that's it.
That's interesting. So we're probably going to close out the session of WebRTC. I'm going to try to zoom back because I see I'm zooming in too close, and you can see all my my bar back there. See that? But anyway, we are going to move on to the mature audiences. And, of course, Salvatore, you're welcome to stay with us. Lorenzo as well. These are the regulars, but we're going to go off the record now.
Well, before we go off the record, have you mentioned TADHack in Madrid?
Well, it was mentioned in the intro, I believe, but that's a good point because there's nothing better than meeting people, and you would meet... well, I think Mr. Tim Patton is going to be there, actually, in Madrid, and Mr. James Bodie's going to be there. I'm going to be there, and I'm not sure who else, but anyway, this is just an example. TADHack is in Madrid June 6th, 5th and 6th, 6th and 7th? 6th and 7th, I think. But the other than that...
well worth mentioning that Google are sending somebody to TADHack. They're sending... Andre Pinto, who's one of the core WebRTC engineers.
Yes,
he is. And he's showing up as well. So you know, just meeting me and James and Randy is icing on the cake compared with meeting somebody who's actually had their hands in Chrome. So no,
that's a good point. Even though I feel denigrated at it, but
that was the idea. Yeah.
And it's also worth pointing out that if you can't physically go there in person, you can always watch it streamed remotely, can't you, Randy?
Yes, and there's satellite events in Chicago. Now, who knows where the other place? There's an Asian venue.
There's a couple of Indian ones, and. Yes. Good old Nir Semyonovich was talking about doing an Israel one as well.
That's great. But at any rate, yes, TADHack, TADHack.com. And by the way, we can get you in. We can get you a pass. The VUC can get you a pass to get into TADHack. So,
Randy, did you mention how much prize money is up for grabs?
No, I didn't. James, how much prize money is up for grabs?
I think it's
a considerable amount.
$40,000. And rather interestingly, it's not just there for one prize. It's spread across a whole load of categories. So the chances of winning things are pretty good.
Excellent. Anyway, you do want to come to that, and if you're in range of Madrid, write me at voipusersconference@gmail.com, and we'll get you in. I mean, that's worth a couple €100 right there. I mean, you need to be in range because we're not going to fly you in from the U.S., but if you're able to come and meet us and check it out. Let me just reiterate that the O'Reilly folks have been very nice, and you should go to O'Reilly.com, and if you didn't win, and only 2 people did win this book, called Real-Time Communications with WebRTC, and that was written by our guests today, who are, of course, Simon Pietro Romano and Salvatore Loreto. I think I'm close on there. Salvatore, did I?
Yeah, right.
Is that close?
Perfect.
Close. So you want to go to that. Also, by the way, if you like the VUC and you want to support us, there's an Amazon banner. I see that podcasts do this now. We're not really a podcast, but if you want to go to our site at vuc.me and check it out, you can actually, whatever you're buying at Amazon, if you do buy at Amazon, if you go through our site, we'll get a little something from that, a couple of pennies here and there, you know, and that works out. So do that. Anyway, be sure and check this book out. This book just came out in April, so
Yes.
here it is, WebRTC. And we will check you out next week. We've got another interesting session, and the next 6 or 7 weeks, everything is booked up. We may even have a True Phone thing coming up in something like, June 20th, possibly. After June 20th, I'll be in Tokyo. I may or may not be around since it's the middle of the night there. And then after that, we're heading towards VUC 500, ladies and gentlemen.
Way!
Yes, and that will be 24 hours of VUC. So every one of you has to come in and help me out with that. Salvatore, thank you.
Randy, how old were you
When I started VUC,
started
I was
VUC?
about 13.
Yeah, clearly.
Let me just thank Salvatore for joining us, and I hope we'll see you again.
Yeah, sure, I will. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Great,
you.
and this is an excellent book. I recommend it highly to everybody. Anybody else have any final, James, Andy, Lorenzo,
Carl.
Tim, anyone? Carl? Well, if we get Carl in here, we're going to be in trouble. It'll be hours. All right, anyway, thanks everybody. I'm going to turn off the live audio feed where there are hundreds of people listening, of course. Here, I've clicked on it. Stop broadcast, yes. And we're going to stop the Hangout, but we'll be here. Everybody in the Hangout can stick around, and everybody in ZipDX can stick around. Take care. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.